Today on the SSDA Soundwave, we're joined by Nichelle Henderson, a candidate for the California State Superintendent of Public Instruction. Nichelle is an educator and advocate with nearly 3 decades of experience in California schools. She's taught middle school math, mentored future teachers at Cal State LA, and serves on the LA Community College District Board. And she brings a teacher's perspective to education leadership with a focus on connecting classrooms, colleges, and communities. Welcome, Nichelle. It's wonderful to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're very grateful you participated in the SSDA Candidate Forum. It was a fantastic opportunity for our members to get to know you a little bit. And this is kind of our follow-up and a little bit more informal, right? So let's start off by just tell us, I introduced you, but tell us a little bit about who Nichelle Henderson really is and why the State Superintendent of Public Instruction. That's a very daunting position, right?
I'm realizing that it's crazy making. So I'm a wife, a mother of 4 adults. My youngest turned 31 last week. A grandma of now 4, just welcomed a new granddaughter last week. And just being a teacher, being a trustee on the community college board, being a teacher educator, and looking back at my time in the classroom as a classroom teacher and seeing that not much has changed in terms of what's wrong and how we can make it right. And knowing that this position can make such a difference for children and young people across our state. Running this campaign is a huge, crazy undertaking, but my goal is to bring people together. I've been successful in my professional life and my personal life by creating collaborations and building partnerships and getting to know people. And so as I've embarked upon this 58 county tour with my campaign, being able to meet people and really learning, hearing what's going on in every part of our state has been so insightful, but crucial for the work that I will be doing as the superintendent. So there is a lot that I don't know, which is why I'm traveling to learn more about the real meat and grits around the challenges that small school districts in rural areas and are faced with, not just what I think they are, what people say they are, because they just want to talk, really knowing what's going on and being able to help. So that is why I'm running for a superintendent.
Well, you're coming from LA Community College, which is a fairly large system, and going to an even larger system with the state, and that covers a very diverse and incredibly beautiful state. I mean, California is by far, I think, one of the most beautiful states in the union, but very geographically diverse. And
Yes.
So I applaud you for wanting to get out of LA and visit some of the rural areas, right?
Yes.
So you hit on a point I thought super interesting. Not much has changed, and that's a kind of an indictment of the educational system, not just in California, but across the country. There have been efforts to change things, but by far we still continue to do things the same way we've done them for a long time.
Yes.
AI is introducing kind of a new facet to education and what may be possible from the perspective of being able to individualize instruction. Tell me about the change that you'd like to see. Like, what is it that you envision that would be different, that would break that cycle of lack of change, right?
That's a very good question. Really, through the lens of a teacher educator, providing support in the way that teachers really need it. I work in a teacher credentialing program, so we make sure that new and pre-service teachers are able to teach the curriculum, but we don't teach them how to. So this morning I've been having a number of application interviews for prospective candidates for my program. And one of the questions that we ask them is, what does equity in education mean for them? And a few students have struggled with the answer because they're thinking about it through the lens of just equality, but equity. What does it look like to have equity in our system of education? Not just what it means, but what does it look like? And so what I envision is focusing on student success. We say that we're focused on student success, but if we did, our priorities would be aligned. Our funding allocations would meet the need. And so what I envision changes is really, as we focus on student success, what does it look like? How does it look when we're supporting our teachers? What does it look like when we center students, set goals for students that are realistic, and really make sure that we help them reach those goals by ending this system of social promotion, really making sure that children are reading by 9 and not allowing them to move to 4th grade or 5th grade, not being able to read. It's being intentional and bringing every voice, as many voices as I can, to the table to really get a better feel for what that looks like in every different area and help them to do that. So what I hope to see is increases in student achievement and student outcomes by addressing standardized testing and allowing instructional time to be instructional, not to teach to a test. It's making sure that the funding allocations are, although they're not really equal, is starting out by helping school districts really use the money that they have in meaningful ways. Because what I'm seeing just as a trustee and what I saw as a teacher is the legislature, and many candidates that are legislators or current or former legislators, talk about the money that they've made sure go into our schools. But there's a true disconnect from the intention of that legislation and how the funding is actually utilized in our school districts. And understanding that as a superintendent, it's my job to make sure that that funding is allocated and utilized in the way that it was intended in the legislation and the policy.
It's a very good point. And actually you've hit a bunch of topics, and as soon as you start talking, I have 20,000 questions, right? But this is a big problem, an issue for small school districts, is that we keep being told what to do, and we keep being issuing money and categorical programs that are designed for urban settings, and they're not designed for rural communities. And then they're told to make it work. And we take on the state takes on a very compliance attitude about, well, if you didn't do this, then we're going to take the money back. That has created a very, very unfair system. And it's created a system that doesn't value what that student needs, which I'm sure that decision is a local decision. What does the child need? And it's not a state decision. But so how do you see kind of the releasing educators to do the job that they know how to do, they've been trained to do, that they're passionate about, they care about these kids? We need to start letting go of some of those strings that say, this is how we want you to spend the money. And I know I'm contradicting you a little bit, but I want to hear how you would balance these things, as to say, taking care of kids after school is an urban problem, right? In a
Right.
large, where both families are working. In rural communities, we don't need to spend the money on ELOP, but we need to spend it on other things. And so how do we provide that flexibility so that rural communities are able to use that money in ways that they see
That they need it.
beneficial for them, right? For the kids.
Well, again, that is why it's so important to bring voices to the table. And from what I'm gathering is small school district voices are not always at the decision-making table. And so, it's that saying that the squeaky wheel gets the oil.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about our allocations and how we're giving out this money, thinking intentionally about student success, what does that school district or that school need in that particular area, and applying the funding to that. So yes, looking at literally how you deal with small school districts, how you deal with larger school districts. What does the funding look like when we're talking about fully funding and equity? What does that look like for every school based off of what that school or school district needs to meet the needs of the kids? So saying, okay, in this area, you may not need this particular funding, but allow you to use that funding for something else. That's the flexibility that you're talking about. And if it's a legislative issue, to work with the governor, to work with the State Department of Education to create that flexibility, but also to work with our legislators, because very often they're thinking about legislation to impact our schools and they don't know anything about what's going on in our schools. Hence, the problem that we're seeing, that it's just been this perpetual dealing with a problem that should not be a problem. If you talk to somebody about what they need, you try to meet their needs. But when you don't bring them to the table and know what they need, you give them what you think they need.
Well, that's part of the problem is the legislature is majority of the legislators, I think 60 out of 80 legislators come from urban areas. And so
Exactly.
the rural voice gets drowned out very quickly. And a lot of these folks, in all fairness to them, have just never been in a rural community and
Right.
they've always lived urban, right? And so,
So you don't you base your problem solving on what you experience, not based off of what the situation could be for other
yeah.
people. And so that's why, we are really, that's the reason that we've embarked on this 58 county tour, because I want to visit these rural schools. I want to see and know what the issues are, because I don't want to make assumptions as the superintendent. I want to know before I become superintendent how I can bring folks together and make sure that voices are at the table. But in terms of your question, it's really looking at maybe not giving the small districts this money that forces them to use it in a way that they don't need it, and thinking about how we can provide the funding for what they actually need.
Well, yeah, we're a big advocate for adding to the base of the LCFF formula as opposed to these supplemental programs. And so would you be willing to commit to publicly opposing legislation that mandates new programs for small districts without the funding or the staffing resources?
I think most definitely, but I would oppose it for all school districts, because again, you have someone that's never been to your area and then they come to you and they say, well, I made sure that you had $1 million to do X, but you're not impressed by that because you didn't need to do X. You needed to do Y, but you couldn't use that money for it. It's have that voice in the table, at the decision-making table, is how you do what our school districts need. And yes, I would oppose it, because I don't believe that we should continue to create additional programming and put money towards that programming. Fund what we need so that the school districts can determine how they best meet the needs of their students and the families and their communities.
Nichelle, that's very refreshing to hear. And because for a very long time, SSDA has not had a place at the table simply to share our view and opinions. And particularly with this administration at CDE, we've not had the opportunity to really share views and try to educate about what happens in rural communities. So I appreciate you saying that, and hopefully SSDA can have a place at the table if you're elected to the state superintendent.
And I am sincere about bringing people to the table. It's really important. It's one thing to say you need this. I'll make sure that you get that. It's another thing to talk to you about what you need and work with you to find out how you need it, if that makes sense.
It does.
To make sure that you get it so that it works with your needs, not what I think your needs are. And it's the same in larger school districts. You have funding that's specifically for a program, but we're creating these programs and putting money towards programs where teachers, if we allow them to teach, you wouldn't need the program. So if we put that money into our regular funding, you wouldn't need these additional programs to help meet a need. We're putting Band-Aids on an open wound and not allowing it to heal.
Nichelle, I want to circle back around to you talked a little bit about accountability and about state testing. As I travel around the state, there are districts who are very focused on state standards and having their kids test well and meet the state standards as tested. And then I have other districts that I've visited that are members that find that there's value in other things. And as a community, they've come around other values that it may not be. We're not focused on having everybody be above standards, but we're focused on other aspects. And I think that's a lot about local control, and the whole purpose for having boards that lead educational organizations, because they are the reflection of the community and what the community values. And so they teach to that. And so I recognize that we need to have some state standards, and that a portion of that has to be tested and through a state accountability test. But what is your vision for what a student in the state of California should look like, right? We talk about the profile of a graduate. What does that look like on a statewide level as sort of the minimum that every student in California should receive, regardless of where they are geographically? These are tough questions, Nichelle.
It's a tough question. And because we're dealing in a bureaucracy that where you have folks that just continue the status quo, never think outside of the box. I plan to work outside of a box. I don't believe in boxes. I believe that you have places where things need to work a little differently than the system allows. And how do we allow that flexibility? How do we fund that flexibility? Because we all want to see students achieve the goals set for them. We don't work with students to determine what their goals should be. We have students that are not planning to go to college, and we're not preparing them with opportunities to not go to college. We're preparing them to be unemployed as they come out of high school and not have any real viable options. What success looks like for me for students is that they're able to read, they're able to perform basic mathematical computations, and they are feeling fulfilled in terms of knowing that there is a pathway for them to get to where they aspire. Because for young people, it changes. You have a 5-year-old that wants to be a fireman and a dog catcher, and then they want to be an airline pilot. It's meeting, when we talk about meeting people where they are, literally meeting kids where they are. If we're going to say that we're going to adhere to this no child left behind foolishness, knowing that children are being left behind, make sure that they can read when they're in the 3rd grade and don't allow them to go to 4th grade when they can't read. Stopping the system of social promotion, but setting individual goals. We do it for students all the time in special ed programs. They have individual programs that are followed by their teachers. Create individual programs for all students so that they get the basics to be able to complete a job application, open a bank account, buy a car, be a good citizen, whatever that looks like. And then you create these other pathways for them. No, not additional programs, but have pathways available to them that they build on that knowledge and access. Standardized testing does not work the way that it's being implemented. And what I'm seeing with standardized testing is because we give teachers a certain amount of instructional time to teach in a content area. But because of the high-stake nature of standardized testing, they're teaching to the test, not for learning. And then we have the system of social promotion. These standardized tests are assessments. What are we using the data for if we're allowing students to matriculate from grade to grade, not being able to function in the grade that they're leaving? It's having students that are achieving at where they are, not having a 6th grader reading at a 3rd grade level, having a 3rd grader being able to read so that when they get to 6th grade, they're able to function in 6th grade, and have that test be aligned with how students are learning and what they're learning. And that's a long-winded answer to say, I believe very heartedly in differentiation. And what does it mean for each student? No.
What you're talking about is like almost an indictment of what teachers are doing, because it's
not what it's what the teacher is being told to do because of the high stake nature of this test. Teachers want to teach so that students learn.
Right. But teachers should be differentiating and providing individualized
and they're not able to
support.
do that because we're teaching to a test. And so if we change the nature of the testing, if we allow teachers to teach, we will have fewer students that are matriculating through this system, not able to read, not able to function in arithmetic. It's again,
I love this topic.
Mandate on things. Let's allow teachers to teach. Let's stop giving teachers all of these other things to do. Allow them to teach so that they can enjoy their work. It is stressful for teachers to know that after less than 8 months of instruction, they are administering an assessment that they know that the majority of their students are not going to pass.
I love this topic, Nichelle, and for me, it's almost a theoretical topic because, you know, the reality is what an assessment's supposed to do is assess whether a child has captured and understood the information that's been taught to him or
Right.
her. And it, you know, that's where the teacher should be teaching the content, not to the assessment. And if
The
they're,
assessment should match the content, the way
well,
students are learning it. So I'll
or
give an
the
example.
yeah, the learning should match
The
the state
learning should
standards,
match.
right?
So when I was a sixth grade teacher and looking at and I taught math and science, so I'm looking at the assessment. In sixth grade, we teach integers. Students learn how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide with integers.
Yeah, the standards for the grade level that
The
are
standards for
that are
the grade
promulgated
level.
by the state, right?
But on the test, the way the problems are given, there's no leading up. So the actual problems on the test involve all four functions
Yeah.
versus having a portion of the test where you practice and show how you add integers, a portion of the assessment where you subtract integers, a portion of the assessment where you multiply, and a portion where you divide. And then at the end, you're putting all of those operations into one problem. That's not how the assessment looks. And so we're not getting a really strong demonstration of what students are able to do. And we're not taking into account that some students have test anxiety. We're not taking into account that there are some concepts that students may not have fully grasped. We start school in late August. School is over in June. We test in April on the standards. A teacher hasn't had an opportunity to teach the standards. So I don't like to
No,
talk about fairness, but when we talk
yeah.
about equity, we're never going to see student improvement as far as these standardized tests are concerned until we're able to.
So, but Nichelle, the what is the concrete action that
It's
the
addressing
state
standardized
superintendent?
testing. It's addressing standardized testing, the way that we are implementing and administering these tests, but also getting back to basics. What is more important, a test or student learning? How do we assess student learning? The assessment that we're giving is not a good assessment of student learning because we're not allowing. So my point is, if we're only going to allow teachers to teach the first semester in a month or two of the standards, then test on that. Test on what teachers are able to teach in that time period. Because we're holding teachers accountable for student learning when they're not able to teach. So you said it's an indictment on teachers. I'm hoping that it's an indictment on the system of education.
Well, it is
That
the
is
system, right?
designed to to ensure that all students are actually learning and able to demonstrate their learning in the way that they learn. So I want to see us do better in terms of really being intentional about addressing standardized testing and addressing
And the state superintendent, that would be a role the superintendent would have.
Exactly. It is a key role of the superintendent, and I
So,
definitely plan to make some changes.
so you want to make changes in the state accountability system.
And the state accountability system, because it is a means to holding teachers and school districts accountable and responsible, that's not equitable.
Let's talk a little bit about geographical equity, right? In terms of funding, because I think that's a topic that's near and dear to a lot of small school district superintendents' hearts. You know, the LCFF formula is inherently flawed when it comes to geographical equity because the smaller and the more rural school districts receive way less money than the large urban districts, proportionally, right? And the challenge is that, you know, areas that are rural have challenges that are costly, transporting kids far distances to you know, in rural areas, the district boundaries are very large, right? Few kids, so you have to run more routes for fewer kids because they live spread out throughout the county. What would you do to address some of these equities in the LCFF formula? It's a tough question.
It's a very tough question because we have the same issue with our funding formula in the community colleges. It's based on butts and seats, and you can't always have butts and seats. So adjusting. So when we talk about equity and we talk about how we adjust, if that money that you're using to transport students, how can we adjust our formula so that we allow for students that it might be more feasible for them to learn from home or at a satellite location in their area, where the students that live in a particular area meet in a space where they have access to their teacher and maybe an aide in the class that can help them in real time while they are interacting with their other classmates remotely. What does that look like? What does funding look like when you don't have a literal butt in a seat in a classroom, in a traditional classroom setting? What we learned during the pandemic, we are not using to our benefit to support student learning and access. So looking at the funding formulas across the board, how that funding formula impacts students in small communities, but also how it's impacting students across the state. I would like for us to get to a place, Yuri, where we're not just talking about small school districts and large school districts. We're talking about school districts, and we're
Yeah,
able to
that
meet
would
the need so
that
that
would be nice.
you're not feeling separated, right? And so when I talk about bringing people together and having voices at the table, that's what I'm talking about. How do you all in small districts have conversations with leaders in larger districts where we're discussing the needs of your students as needs of students, not just in one particular area versus another, so that we can really get to the nitty gritty of what the need is in the area. I would rather see you taking that money that you're using in small districts for transportation towards helping students attend class in a non-traditional way.
I think that that's great, but all of those things cost money. So
They
would you
cost
be
money, but again, it's in how you allocate your funds from the on the state level to ensure that they meet the need on the local level.
right? And so would you be supportive? One of our big pushes right now, one of our big advocacy efforts is to adjust the formula to have a
Yes.
supplement for rural school districts so that a rural district, regardless of how many kids they educate, would have a base amount of funding that would allow them to provide a
Right.
minimal level of education that is something that we um, would have as a minimal expectation statewide.
Right,
And would you be
regardless of the
willing?
number of students that you have in a classroom. So when I talk about equity and looking at funding, that is what I'm talking about. It's
Perfect.
funding allocations across the board, regardless if you're a small school or a large school. If you have 1,000 students or 200, looking at the funding that you need to meet the needs of your students in the way that you need to meet that need, so that you're not saying to the superintendent, we're a small school district, allow us to use the money this way.
No.
No, you are a school district. Give you the funding that you need to do what you need to do in the way that you need to do it that's best for students and families, regardless of the size.
You know, CDE has a reputation out there as being a very compliance oriented and not as supportive as what we would expect as a small and rural community. We expect CD to be supportive and helpful when we call or reach out for assistance. Unfortunately, right now it has more of a compliance and less of a helpful culture. What would you do to change that? And is that something you feel needs to be changed?
Yes, I do feel that that needs to be changed, because when you're making decisions for people, you should be willing to have conversations with them about the decisions that are being made, and they should be at the table when those decisions are being made. And immediately as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about how we lobby in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. You should not have to lobby the CDE.
We shouldn't,
You
right?
should not. And when you call, you should be able to speak to someone that's willing to think outside of the box. And I view it as collaboration. I view it as allowing small and rural districts to participate in and advocate for their students and their communities. So you're not asking for favors. You're not asking for special circumstances. You're asking for the flexibility to do what you need to do in the way that it needs to be done. And so as superintendent running the Department of Ed, works to make sure that we are working with all of our school districts in a really collaborative manner, more of as a customer service type of situation versus the investigative compliance officer that only wants to talk to you when you're not doing the thing we said you should do.
Absolutely. Last question here, Nichelle, and thank you for being patient with me here. 4 years from now,
Mhm.
What is the one measure, student outcomes, staffing metric, funding equity, that small school district superintendents will look at and say, she kept her word?
Honestly, that would be based on the word that I give, talking to them and knowing what they need, and together coming up with a plan of action, and me over the next few years making sure that I activate that. So I can't say today,
You
it'll
can't
be
say it is.
where
Fair enough, right? Fair enough.
what we come to an agreement. So I'm giving my word to small and rural school districts that as I'm visiting now, as a superintendent, I will continue to visit and highlight and uplift your voices in decision making, because you will be able to have representatives in the room to speak for you, and we will come up with plans that in the next over the 4 years of my term you will be able to see, because we'll be working together to make these things happen.
I love it. Nichelle, thank you so much for being on the show, for being a willing participant in SSDA's activities. And I look forward to crossing paths with you as you travel around the state and I travel around the state. And I wish you the best of luck on your
Thank
campaign.
you so much, Yuri, and thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts and my vision. I really want to take this opportunity as a superintendent to reimagine education. Really think outside of the box. It's being destroyed. How do we build it back? Do we build it back the way it looks now, or do we build it back in the way that works for everybody? And this is the
The,
perfect opportunity.
the future has a lot in store for us on that front, I think, with AI and with all the changing, the way our world is changing. So I look forward to continuing to hear about your vision and to seeing you shine
Thank
and hopefully elected, right? Is that what you're
thank
set out to do?
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And, to everyone, small rural districts watching, I hope to meet you all some in the next few months as I'm campaigning and touring the state.
Fantastic, Nichelle. Thank you.